report aimed to analyze the causes of inflation over the 10 years in Malaysia. It seeks to identify the causes that contribute with these issues, such as oil, goods and service tax (GST), COVID-19 pandemic, post-pandemic, and import expenses and subsidy.
Hi and Assalamualaikum. My name is NURBATRISYIA WAJIHA. Firstly, I will talk about background of Malaysia. Malaysia is a Southeast Asian country located on the Malay Peninsula and part of Borneo Island. Malaysia is an upper middle income nation in Southwest Asia with an estimated population of 34.1 million people in 2024, growing from 33.4 million in 2023. Malaysia is a developing country with an open, diverse economy that is developing rapidly. Since gaining independence in 1957, Malaysia has transformed from an agriculture-based economy to one driven by manufacturing, exports, and services. Established strong industrial capacities, especially in the areas of electronics, petrochemicals, and palm oil, all of which have grown to be substantial contributors to the country's GDP. Recent estimates from the Department of Statistics Malaysia and the International Monetary Fund (IMF) indicate that the country's nominal GDP in 2024 was around $445 billion and approximately Rm 2.1 trillion in Malaysian ringgit. The GDP is driven by both a global upturn in trade, particularly in the electrical and electronic sector, and an effective recovery in domestic demand. Furthermore, the GDP growth rate was recorded around 5.1% in 2024, higher than 3.6% in 2023. The service sector, which represented between 53% and 54% of GDP, was the main driver of this growth. Retail and wholesale trade, tourism, insurance, and finance were its primary contributors. Additionally, the manufacturing sector also experienced significant growth, comprising approximately between 37% to 38% of GDP, with significant increases in export of semiconductors and consumers' electronics. However, the agriculture sector contributed between around 7% to 8% of GDP, with rubber and palm oil remaining significant exports. Positive contributions to economic momentum were also made by the government's ongoing digital economy programs and active infrastructure development initiative. On the national income front, gross national income (GNI) and gross national product (GNP) showed an upward trend. Nominal GNI was reported to be 1,869.6 billion in 2024, reflecting a stronger GDP and improved net income from abroad. Next, the GNI per capita recorded approximately Rm 54,894 ringgit in 2024. The GNP stood at approximately Rm 419.9 billion in the fourth quarter of 2024. These numbers demonstrate a stable national income structure and a growing economic integration with the outside world. Next, despite its achievement, Malaysia, like many other countries, has to deal with economic issues such as inflation, which has a direct impact on the cost of living and the purchasing power of people. The Consumer Price Index (CPI), which is used to measure inflation in Malaysia, tracks the average price changes of chosen basket of necessities like housing, healthcare, education, food, and transportation. In 2024, CPI in Malaysia showed a slower increase compared to the previous year. The average rate of inflation was around 1.8%, which was less than the 2023, which was 2.5%. This was due to the stabilization of food and fuel price globally. The CPI in early 2025 stayed under control, with initial reports data indicating that January inflation was 1.7%, mostly due to slight increase in the cost of food and drink. Malaysia labor market maintained consistent improvements throughout the 2024. Malaysia unemployment rate dropped to an average of 3.3%, showing a continued recovery in the labor market in 2024. The overall employment reached around 16.8 million, while the labor force participation rate increased to 70.4%. In conclusion, Malaysia's economy in 2024 continued to show strength and adaptability in the face of challenges, positioning itself for sustained growth in upcoming years.
Over the years, inflation has become one of the most significant issues. It can be stated that various factors have contributed to Malaysia's inflation over the past few years. 2015, the inflation rate is 2.1 and show positive growth, where it's increasing in 2016 by 2.08 and 2017 by 3.87. During the year 2020, the inflation has been relatively low. It is definitely affecting the economy and causing fluctuation in the inflation rate. In 2019, the inflation rate was 0.66, which was lower compared to the previous year. This is significant drop in inflation show that the economy was relatively stable. This graph shows percentage of inflation over the 10 years in Malaysia, where the y-axis represents inflation rate and x-axis represents yield. In 2015 to 2017, the inflation rate is increased from 2.1 to 3.87 because in 2017, the government introduced Goods and Service Tax (GST). In 2018 to 2022, the inflation rate is decreased from 0.88 to negative 1.13. This is because of cancellation GST in 2018. In 2019, living expenses in under control made the inflation even lower, and in 2020, the inflation decreased to negative due to pandemic COVID-19. In 2021 to 2022, the inflation rate is increased from 2.48 to 3.38 because of in 2021, Malaysia still recover from pandemic COVID-19 and the product and service is increasing. In 2022, inflation rate increased due to increased import expenses. In 2023 to 2024, the inflation rate is decreased from 2.49 to 1.83 because in 2023, the government tried to stabilize price to settle after pandemic happened. In 2024, the government target subsidy program.
My name is NATASHA binti Muhammad. Next, we proceed to trend analysis. Trend analysis is known as the technique of analyzing historical data to find trends and forecast future developments or behaviors. By examining data over a specific period, it assists firms in recognizing trends, changes, and new opportunities in the sector. Trend analysis provides useful knowledge that can direct strategic decision making and enhance long-term planning, whether it be for financial forecasting, consumer behavior, or market patterns. Year 2015 to 2018, oil and GST. Based on the data above, Malaysia's inflation rate from 2015 to 2018 showed different changes because of government actions. In 2015, inflation was 2.10%, mainly because of the introduction of the GST in April that year. GST is the Goods and Services Tax. The GST caused prices of many goods and services to rise as business and consumers had to adjust to the new tax. For the previous year, there were no tax charged in every goods and services. For the year 2016, the inflation is almost the same as 2015, which only increased by 0.2%. This was due to higher food price and the low value of ringgit, which made imported goods cost more. Year 2023 to 2024, import expenses and subsidies. According to the data on 2.1, in 2023, the inflation rate was 2.49%. This was due to the government's attempts to stabilize prices as well as the global economy was starting to settle after the pandemic. Because the economy is still recovering, the inflation rate decreased this year.
My name is ADILA binti Nordin. So right now I'm going to continue about the trend of inflation in Malaysia from the year 2019 to 2022. So during this period, we can see like how inflation changed because of both local government policies and the global events like the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's start with 2019. In 2019, Malaysia inflation rate was very low at about 0.66%. This was because of oil price were stable and the government worked so hard to control the cost of the living. There was no GST at that time since it was already replaced by SST, and overall, the economy was quite stable. Price of goods and service did not change much compared to the years before, so people did not feel too much pressure from the inflation. Moving on to 2020, inflation actually turns negative at the negative 1.140%. This means Malaysia experienced deflations. The main reason for this was the COVID-19 pandemic. When the COVID-19 hit, many businesses closed or slowed down, and people lost jobs and had less income, and everyone focused only buying the basic needs. Because of this, the demand for goods and service dropped and the price went down. At the same time, global oil price also fell because the world's economy was not active. This was fools cheaper in Malaysia and helped push inflation into negative territory. In 2021, the situation changed again. Inflation is up to 2.48%. This was because the economy started to recover as the lockdown were lifted and the business reopened. People start to spending more and demand for goods and the service went up. Also, oil the price began to increase globally because a demand returned. This made foods and the transport more expensive, and as a result, the price of many other items went up too. The rise in this fuel's price affected production costs and the transportation costs, which contribute to the higher inflation rate in 2021. Now, let's take a look at 2022. In 2022, inflation increased further to about 3.38%, which is quite high compared to the previous few years. This happened because the world was still facing the challenges after the COVID-19. The global fuel price remained high, and the cost of the import goods also went up because the ringgit was weaker. This factor pushed the price higher for many goods in Malaysia, especially foods and food. At the same time, supply chain problem from the pandemic still affected the availability of some goods, which is made price go even up more. The government tried to control the inflation through the subsidy, but the pressure from the global factor made it harder to keep price down. In conclusion, from the 2019 to 2022, Malaysia inflation trend changed a lot because of the pandemic, the recovery periods, and the global issue like oil price and the supply chain problem. We can see that the inflation went from very low in 2019 to negative 2020, then started rising again in 2021 and 2022. This shows how inflation is not only affected by what happened in Malaysia, but also by global economic conditions.
2017, inflation reached its highest point at 3.87%. This resulted from a further increase in fuel prices, which raised the cost of transportation and production, leading to higher prices overall. In 2018, inflation dropped sharply to 0.88%. This was because of the government cancellation of the GST in June 2018, which lowered the cost of goods and services. Year 2023 to 2024, import expenses and subsidies. According to the data on 2.1, in 2023, the inflation rate was 2.49%. This was due to the government's attempts to stabilize prices as well as the global economy was starting to settle after the pandemic, because the economy is still recovering.
Overall, when we look at Malaysia inflation from 2015 to 2024, we can see that how the rate of inflation changed because of both government action and the world event. The inflation rate was not steady. It went up and down depending on the situation in the country and the outside. In the first years, we can see that inflation rise in 2015 and 2016 because of the introduction of GST and the weaker ringgit. This made many goods and services more expensive, and the people feels more pressure, especially after GST started in 2015. By 2017, inflation peaked at around 3.87%, mainly because food price increased. This made the production and the transport costs higher, which led to price increase in the many sectors. But in 2018, inflation dropped sharply because the government removed the GST and brought back the SST. This change helped reduce the price of many items and give some relief to some people. Moving on into 2019, inflation stayed low and stable as oil prices were steady and the government took steps to control the living of costs. Moving on to 2020, inflation actually turns negative at the negative 1.140%. This means Malaysia experienced deflations. The main reason for this was the COVID-19 pandemic. When the COVID-19 hit, many businesses closed or slowed down, and people lost jobs and had less income, and everyone focused only buying the basic needs. Because of this, the demand for goods and services dropped and the price went down. At the same time, global oil price also fell because the world's economy was not active. This was foods cheaper in Malaysia and helped push inflation into negative territory. In 2022, inflation climbed even higher due to the global factor, high food price, supply chains problem, and the weaker ringgit pushed the price up for many goods, especially foods and the food. In the 2023 and 2024, inflation started to ease. By the 2024, the rate was about 1.83%. One reason was the government's targeted subsidy, which helped control the cost of some goods but also created demand pressure in certain sectors. In summary, from 2015 to 2024, Malaysian inflation was shaped by tax like GST, SST, food price, the pandemic, and the global economic change. This shows how inflation is linked to both what happened inside the country and what happens around the world.
Inflation is a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services in an economy over time. In Malaysia, it is primarily driven by demand pull and cost push. Hello, my name is ADIL bin ALLOHA, and I will be explaining you guys on causes of inflation in Malaysia. Demand pull inflation happens when aggregate demand grows faster than aggregate supply, which causes price to rise. One clear example of this occurred in Malaysia during the post-pandemic recovery period between 2021 and 2022. As movement restrictions were lifted and borders reopened, we saw a sharp surge in demand, especially in the services sector. People were eager to travel, dine out, and enjoy activities they had missed during the lockdowns. This sudden wave of pent-up demand placed strong pressure on industries like tourism and food and beverage. A good example is the hotel industry, which experienced a 12.7% increase in price. This happened because the number of travelers rose quickly, but the available supply of rooms couldn't catch up. On top of that, supply chain disruptions, which were still recovering from the pandemic, made it even harder for the business to meet the rising demand. So in this situation, too much money was chasing too few goods and services, which is exactly what demand pull inflation means. On the other hand, cost push inflation sets in when production costs increase and the prices have to be adjusted accordingly by businesses to keep their profit margins intact. Malaysia has been battling its share of cost push inflation in recent years. The 2022 global energy crisis, during which energy prices went up nearly 30%, saw a marked impact on the cost of manufacturing and transport in Malaysia. Energy being a base input across all sectors of the economy, therefore, these price hikes had the effect of a wave hitting all sectors. Another such incident came in November 2023, when the Malaysian government instituted a floating price mechanism for chicken. By withdrawing the ALIA subsidies, this change in policy saw an almost 15% increase in the price of chicken products over mere months, a price that still flowed directly to the pocket of every household, serving as a vivid illustration of how domestic policy could act as a catalyst for cost-push inflation. Next, currency depreciation stands as another notable cost-push inflation factor in Malaysia. In 2023, the ringgit registered an 8% depreciation against the US dollar, thus hiking the price of imported products. Essential goods such as milk powder and medical instruments were hardest hit because Malaysia imports these in large quantities. The direct effect was because of the weaker ringgit, the landed cost of these goods rise, and importers pass on this higher cost to the consumers. This form of imported inflation is particularly tricky to control for policymakers because it arises from external financial market movements beyond the sphere of domestic direct controls. It is global crisis. The Russia-Ukraine war disrupted world commodity markets, with wheat supplies particularly affected. The conflict thus caused a 40% increase in wheat import prices into Malaysia, as the country imports most of its wheat needs, which then got reflected in the price increase of essential food items such as bread and noodles. This instance perfectly exemplifies external shocks causing domestic inflationary pressures via supply chain disruptions and heightened import costs.
Thank you to ADIL. So now let me continue this presentation by explaining the cause of inflation. This slide explains one of the cause of inflation, which is government policy, especially related to fiscal measurement like tax and spending decision. Government decision about tax can affect price of good and service. In Malaysia, 2015, the government introduced the good and service tax, as we call it GST. This increased price because business passed the tax to consumer. It caused about 2% of inflation for general price increase. In 2018, the GST was removed and replaced it with sales and service tax, as we call it SST. This caused price instability. Some price went up and some price was down unexpectedly. And most of the sector were affected in different ways. So now let's move to the conclusion. In conclusion, inflation in Malaysia over the past decade has been shaped by both global and domestic factors such as government policy, global oil price, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the currency fluctuation. The data from 2015 to 2024 highlight how sensitive the Malaysia economy is to external shock and internal pressure. Inflation matters because it directly affects the people according purchasing power, rising the cost of living, and hitting the low-income household is the hardest. It also reduces consumer confidence, weakness business planning, and slow economic growth. For the last slide, I also like to talk about the conclusion. If inflation is left unchecked, it threatens not only individual welfare but also national savings, investment, and competitiveness, while government action like subsidy and fiscal adjustment help post-pandemic, but they are mostly short-term solutions. Moving forward, Malaysia must focus on long-term strategy like boosting domestic production, improving supply chain efficiency and stabilizing the currency. These steps are crucial to build more resilience and stable economy. In the end, inflation is more than just a number. It impacts our daily life, the strength of our economy and the nation's future. By treating inflation as a serious issue and taking proactive measures, Malaysia can achieve sustainable growth by protecting the welfare of its peoples. I think that's all from us. Thank you.